All right, for today's video review, we're going to be taking a look at Transformers Generation Select's Transmutate. Now, this is a figure that I've been pretty excited for a while. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Transmutate, it's pretty much a character that showed up in a single episode of Beast Wars. It was one of the, like sort of funkier, more cerebral episodes of Beast Wars where uh, one of the stasis pods, which in the show was like the mechanic that they had for new characters showing up. One of the stasis pods malfunctioned and had, like was heavily damaged on impact. And it ended up, instead of, giving a new Maximal or Predacon, it had this creature that they called Transmutate, which was pretty much just this like weird sort of uncanny malformed Cybertronian that barely had any memory circuits or any like logic circuits. Like it was, basically acted like a child for the most part. And it was this kind of creepy, uncanny episode, and it had to do with like what the characters prioritize in terms of what they found normal and what they found useful. And it was like it's a really strange commentary to put in an episode of Beast Wars of all things. I'm sure like now it probably has some problems in terms of like holding up in terms of talking about like the differently abled and stuff like that, but to have that concept even brought up in an episode of Beast Wars of all things was already pretty beyond its time when it came out then. So I don't know. It's a really nice poetic episode, but the character of Transmutate itself is like this really sort of like uncanny design, and obviously not helped out by the fact that it's rendered in late 90s early CGI. Since like most of the other characters mostly have like robot faces or whatever, so it doesn't hold up to an extent, the animation, but like it mostly is fine, whereas like with Transmutate it has this like horrifying, frankly, like human looking face, and it's just very, very creepy. I mean, I'll toss an image of it up on the screen so you know what I'm talking about. But I like the character a lot. I think it's a really fun episode, but there is something about it that is like every time I watch it, it's just like ooh, like it is uncanny. Really, is the best word for like the design of Transmutate. But anyway, in the show, Transmutate did not transform at all. Like that was one of the malfunctions that the character had. So what they've decided to do here is, instead of just making like a whole new toy for Transmutate, which is like a one episode character, like a little bit too obscure to make a new mold for, they've decided to reuse the Paleotrex fossilizer mold. And yeah, so now Transmutate turns into a T-Rex, which I don't really think suits the character at all, but it has to have a alt mode, I guess. So there it is, the skeletal T-Rex. And yeah, I mean the only real difference, like sculpting wise, is their robot mode heads are different. So therefore, like these bits peeking out of their dinosaur mode heads are a little bit different. This weird sort of fin, I think, looks a little bit strange, and it doesn't like also fit totally flush to the inside of the dinosaur mode head here, just because like this whole shape is meant to fit Paleotrex's head, obviously, which is not a big deal. It just means that those pieces don't sit quite perfectly together. And if you have the mouth closed, that if you want this to sit like up against the head, it's always perpetually looking up, which is why I think like with the mouth open looks a little bit better. But yeah, kind of funny that they decided to paint the teeth too. Like that made it into the paint budget, even though like I'm pretty sure no one who owns this is going to display it in dinosaur mode, just because like the character that it's referencing didn't even have an alt mode. So yeah, I don't know. I get why they use this mold, and like I'll get into that more in robot mode, but it is weird to have Transmutate be a skeletal T-Rex of all things. But yeah. The other thing that's like worth mentioning is they've now decided more recently that Transmutate is a she, like is a female character. Yeah, I guess. I mean, in the cartoon itself, they only ever called Transmutate by like it, because it was like this strange sort of creature. So I've always kind of thought about Transmutate as an it, or like as a they them maybe, but I understand why they wouldn't make this character like one of the first Transformers identifying as they them, because you don't want to make like being non-binary seem like a like malfunctioning trait or anything like that. So yeah, that makes sense why they wouldn't do that. But yeah, no, I've never really thought of the character as a she because like in the show itself they only call it it. So I don't know. I'll probably just use it, but whatever works. But yeah, to get down to not transformation. Let's do some articulation. So articulation, the head can rotate up and down, but again, like the more you rotate it down, the more you've got. Oh, hi, creepy transmutate face. The jaw can open and close. The neck can move up and down like that, but you've got that like split right there. The little arms here are on ball joints. The legs can swivel there, and they're just pegged in because of the whole parts forming transformation. There's a thigh swivel pretty much at the knee, and then they can bend there. There's a foot swivel, another hinge joint there. There's a hinge joint at the feet there. That's the nice thing about these fossilizers, is because they're made up of so many different parts, is they do have a pretty good amount of posability. The tail, it can rotate here and hinge up and down. It can rotate here and here, although I don't imagine that's like terribly useful for dinosaur mode, but yeah, so decent articulation for a dinosaur mode. But again, the mode that matters is I think the one to get into right now. So yeah, like Paleotrex, it is a total parts former, so you'd have to take everything apart. And you can make weapons out of transmutate parts as well for your Maximals and Predacons and other characters. I'm not really going to show that off just because like that's not really the design intent of like this figure in particular. That's more just like a holdover from what the mold comes from. So yeah, you take all these bits apart, take that off, take that off. There we go, and you can leave the head on because it ends up in the same place. So we'll take this piece. The peg here plugs into the bottom jaw there. So you peg that on and then rotate the head around. So I'm going to show, there's like a few different robot mode options. In the instructions, it just shows it as having the same exact robot mode as Transmutate itself, or as Paleotrex himself. So I'm going to show that off first, and then show a few different alterations that I options that you can use to make it look a little bit more like the show model of Transmutate, just because like that was part of the reason that they used this figure in particular, is because you could do that sort of like asymmetrical kind of like awkward proportions thing with this figure, since you can kind of like take apart the parts and mix and match. But yeah, you take this piece here, plugs on to be one of the shoulders. This piece here, part of the tail, is the other shoulder, and then you take the feet and then just bring them forward like that. Those will be the forearms there. Then this piece here with the little dinosaur hands, you rotate the pieces down, rotate the dinosaur legs to the back, and that'll be their waist. Then these pieces, which were the dinosaur mode thighs, just take this part and fold it to the back, and those will be the feet. And then this piece right here is the chest piece. And there you have the base robot mode. Like before, you can use this piece as a weapon and put it in her hand. But I just don't think it looks very good, just because it's obvious that it's not actually holding the piece. So you can just store it back here. There's a little slot right there and a peg on the piece. So that's where I would keep it. And yeah, there you have, at least by default, Transmutate in her robot mode. And yeah, like it still does work well as a Paleotrex remold, just because like it still is awkward, lanky proportions, even if it's not the same proportions of the original Transmutate character model. But I think there are some differences that like make the figure look a little bit better. Like part of the whole design of the show too is like there was a lot of like asymmetrical pieces, like one of the legs was going the other way, like had like weird toes, sort of. One of the hands was like a sort of like regular robot hand, the other one had like this weird sort of like gun hand. So there's a few different things you can do to replicate some of those traits. Transmutate also had like a weird sort of long lanky neck, which by courtesy of this being the Paleotrex mold, part of like the weapon modes for Paleotrex was you could remove the head and it had like this club handle or whatever. So with this figure, like obviously you could still use this as a club and have it be extra creepy, but what's kind of nice is you can just like extend that peg only part of the way to give her that more like weird lanky neck, and that already helps a whole lot in terms of making it look more like the show character. Before I show some of those other modes off, I guess I'll just do articulation now, just because it obviously depends on the orientation you have a lot of these parts in, but by default, head is on a swivel here and can obviously extend up and down. There is a hinge at the neck here which folds forward and back, which is tighter than the hinge here that opens and closes the mouth, which is truly haunting. There's the face sculpt, by the way, the sort of very on model, creepy, uncanny head sculpt of Transmutate. The colors of this figure are maybe a little bit off. Transmutate was more of like a silver with like a goldish tint rather than the more like pure gold, but I think it works well enough. So yeah, the mouth can open and close like that. This joint is a little bit loose, which is kind of annoying, but not too big a deal. The shoulders are on, obviously just pegged in on swivels here and then can hinge out to the side. There's a thigh swivel right here, and then also right here, just where it pegs in. Hinge elbow, and then, like that joint can swivel. There's a swivel right there. Same thing as Dinosaur mode with the feet, pretty much. This arm pretty much does the same thing. There's also a swivel right there. All the same stuff. Waist, swivel, pegged in, universal joints at the hips here. Thigh swivel. You can do whatever you want with these little Dinosaur mode hands. I just like leave them in the back like that. Hinge knee, swivel from where it's pegged in. You can use that joint for some stuff. I do find it to be useful in like one of the variations of how I have this figure set up, and then really nothing at the feet. I mean, you can fold down the heel a little bit, which I guess could be helpful for like, foot leaning forward kind of poses, but not really with the little feet like that. So yeah, so a few things that I've done to kind of like change the shape of this figure. One thing is like I think that the chest piece at least like kind of captures the silhouette a little bit better faced upside down. And again, like Paleo-Trex had like a little Predacon symbol there, so it'd be weird to turn it upside down, but Transmutate does not have that, so that's good. And one of the things that I really like about Transmutate's design is like the backwards leg. So to do that, for one of the legs, I take this piece off and plug this piece on instead. But obviously, like you can't attach it peg to peg there, so I use this peg hole on the inside of the leg and then kind of rotate this bit out a little bit and then bring the foot down like that. So then that's kind of how I have the legs. And then just because it makes this leg a little bit too long, I kind of just like bend that joint a little bit just to have like sort of weird, like awkward, lanky legs. It's kind of how I like to do that. I guess I should mention before we do all that, it doesn't show this off in the instructions itself, but some of the product photography shows the hand being attached like that to kind of like replicate that gun arm a little bit, but I'm not a huge fan of that just because like if it makes the elbow kind of weird and sideways, and I think this looks better faced the other way around. But just worth mentioning that is kind of showed off in some of the product photography as like the robot mode, but that's not how I like to do it. So yeah, have that in there like this, and then actually use the other piece for this just because I need this one for later. And then take this piece off, and I use this piece on this arm over here and rotate it like that. So it has a bit of that sort of like, gun arm kind of aesthetic. I think that's the best way to orient that. I don't love the tail sticking out there, but there's not really a better place to put it. So, works well enough. And then for this arm, I use this little peg on the inside of this piece and fold that out, fold this piece out like that, and plug this in here, and then plug it on like that. It's really awkward looking and kind of strange, but that's also part of the aesthetic of Transmutate, was like weird, awkward proportions and stuff like that. So, that's kind of one of my designs here. I really like this with like the leg sticking backwards. It's like a little bit awkward, but like, with this figure, it's like you're kind of trying to walk a very strange line between making it look more awkward than it was originally to fit that character model, but then, not making it look too weird. So I don't know. That's one option that I have. Another option I have is actually involves a little 3D printed piece that I made, which is pretty much for all intents and purposes just a 5 millimeter peg. But when messing around with this, like before I kind of decided on doing that with like the weird lanky arm, I had one arm just kind of in its stock configuration, like that, and I wanted to use this piece as the other for the other shoulder, but obviously hole cannot match the hole right there. So I created this little peg that can, just plug in, and it's kind of like I would just leave it there during for dinosaur mode, just because like it doesn't ruin the aesthetic a whole lot to have an extra peg sticking out of the side of its neck. But so yeah, this is it's kind of like that, and that also like brings the shoulder out a little bit so that there's a bit more room for some of the parts here with that. And I think like that's probably the orientation I like the best. It still has that awkwardness and that asymmetrical nature to it, but it doesn't have like it's not quite as like awkward as like the weird zigzag arm that they had in the orientation where I was only using the stock parts. So I think this is probably the best of the best configuration I've come up with. But like again, if you're not wanting to use like an extra part, like I think the other one that I showed off still works pretty well. But that's even though it's just like a remold of a fossilizer, that still is kind of the fun of the fossilizers, is being able to like mix and match stuff and kind of decide what you like the best. But for me, it's like, okay, we've got the backwards leg, we've got the one arm with the fingers, we've got the gun arm, and we've got the long lanky neck. Like those are pretty much hitting the visual cues that I wanted it to hit. So I think that works pretty well, but that's just me. Here she is again with Paleotrex, just so you can see, some of the difference there in the proportions and how just moving some of those joints around really does kind of change the whole sort of vibe. Whereas I feel like Paleotrex also has very awkward proportions, but it's very much like a feral sort of like creepy zombie monster, which, Transmutate is weird and kind of creepy looking, but it was really always meant to be more like awkward and clunky rather than like savage looking like Paleotrex looks. So like I don't know. That's why I feel like moving some of the joints around to kind of give it a bit more of like a I don't know like on like dysfunctional vibe works a little bit better. But that's what they look like together. And then just for fun, unfortunately, I have my Beast Wars Rampage is in storage, but here she is with Silverbolt because the three of them were pretty much the main characters in that episode because the whole vibe was like Silverbolt was trying to bring Transmutate over to the good side, and and Rampage was trying to bring Transmutate over to the evil side, and they both like really cared for this character in their own ways, which was kind of like a really interesting vibe to the show because like Transmutate was like basically like had like such like their so much like brain damage basically that it was just like at the level of like a drone or a child, so it didn't really know enough to make its own decisions. So yeah, I don't know, that's what they look like together. I hope we get a new one of him soon. That would be great. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to say about it. It's fun that they use this mold just because like there wouldn't really be another already in use mold to use to make Transmutate, just because like it's so distinctive in the way that it is like so asymmetrical and awkwardly proportioned. Like nothing else really shares its body type. Like other times that they've done it, they've just used like more slender characters. Like I think for one of the bot cons or whatever, they did like they used, oh, what is it, like the RC mold, which like slender, sure, but otherwise like doesn't really look anything like the character. But it's nice to actually like get a official figure of this toy, or the official figure of this character with like this head sculpt. Like they did have that like build a figure with some of the like Beast Wars reissues like years ago. But that's obviously very difficult to get nowadays. So it's nice that they are doing another sort of like not mainline because it's still Generation Selects, but an easy to get Transmutate figure, because it is a really neat character as much as it is very creepy to look at. But yeah, no matter how much how creepy and uncanny this character is, that's still a very good episode of the show. I would definitely recommend going and watching it. And like big spoiler alert, but like the end of the episode where Transmutate dies is like, it gets me every time with just the it's just very, very sad, and it definitely gets me every time. But yeah, no, not really much else to say about this figure. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and consider subscribing. I do reviews every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. And without further ado, here we have Transformers Generation Selects Transmutate.